Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, so you're saying there's a chance we break down the Mets playoff odds and what they have to do to make a run. We also talk about the franchise's new pitching lab, a look down on the farm at how the prospects are performing, our scoreboard results, and of course, we answer your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the Iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration you need to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to our show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, things got a lot more interesting in the span of 1 week. Let's not get crazy. We're not going to overreact, but we went from answering a mailbag question last week. Do we root for the tank, the top 6 pick, or do we root for some form of some positivity in the form of wins to what do the Mets have to do to actually hang around this wild card race, especially considering they play most of the teams in front of them to close out this season? It was a strong week for the Mets. Obviously, the 1 through 4 in the lineup is, quite frankly, what we expected it to be coming into the season. Brandon Nimmo, it seems like he's healthy. Jeff McNeil has found his swing. Francisco Lindor is quite honestly one of the most valuable players by all metrics in baseball right now. And Pete Alonso has found his power surge. And somehow the pitching is getting by with the very little options the Mets have. I mean, Joe, how did we get here? And let's be honest, can the Mets hang around? Or honestly, the better way to paint it, what do they have to do to make these final 6 weeks of the season very, very interesting at Citi Field?
I have no idea how we got here. This just frankly makes no sense. Yeah, it just frankly makes no sense. But we are where we are, and as of this recording here on Tuesday in the afternoon, the Mets are 6.5 out of the last wild card. I think it starts with getting back to 500, and that's obviously the starting point. But the date I'm circling is September 11th, because starting September 11th through the remainder of the season, the Mets will be playing exclusively teams above them in the wild card hunt and teams that are competing for a wild card spot. So they're not facing Atlanta. They're not facing any other division leader. It is exclusively wild card contenders. If they can, between August 22nd and September 11th, get within 5 games, maybe something like that, 4.5 games, if they could get into that range, they at least give themselves a shot of, going on a run for those last couple weeks. And who knows? Could you imagine, Connor? Could you imagine? We've been talking for 1.5 months on this show about how they need to sell and everything they need to get rid of, and don't get fooled into it. And here they do all that. They trade away Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, Mark Canha, David Robertson, whoever else they traded away. Tommy Pham traded away a bunch of people, and here we are, August 22nd, almost a month from the deadline, and we're like, is there a chance for the playoffs? And maybe there is. Might be a small chance, because you like that you would imagine that the DJ Stewarts, et cetera, will come back to earth to some degree. But where we stand right now, 6.5 out with a month and change left, who knows?
Who knows is exactly right. At a minimum, they are keeping things interesting. I think they're playing a different identity of baseball. Like you said, Joe, maybe some of the stuff at the bottom of the order, the Ararus and Ortega and DJ Stewart home runs, and there have been a lot of DJ Stewart home runs, 6 of them already. Maybe it's a fluke right now. Maybe it's a little lightning in a bottle. But the bottom line is, when Nimmo is performing up to expectations, he's now got an 815 OPS. Lindor at an 804 OPS, and he already has a 2020 season in his pocket this year. Pete Alonso, once again, making a run to lead the National League in home runs, chasing Matt Olson. And, of course, Jeff McNeil, who had a horrible season, and we'll talk a little bit more Jeff McNeil during the scoreboard. It's tough to get him out right now. you don't need mammoth contributions from those AAA players that we honestly chuckled when they got here and were playing real games, not meaningful at the moment, it didn't seem like, but actual real MLB games consistently. And credit to those guys. Have they been perfect? I mean, DJ Stewart has an over a 900 OPS, but the other guys, they're just playing good defense and running the bases well, but not really that. They're not being offensive powerhouses, but they don't need to be right now. It's perplexing, Joe. It's a funny game. We always say how funny of a game it is. This is the perfect example of it right now. And I think the other side of it might be there's not a ton of teams sprinting away with the wild card in the National League this year. I mean, the Marlins are in that group. They've come back down to earth a little bit after a hot start to the season. The Diamondbacks got hot again, but they had a brutal stretch in July. I mean, the Giants and the Cubs just kind of get hot and cold. You typically would think the Mets have no business even being mathematically in this right now with, 6 weeks left. And you brought up the September 11th date being so pivotal for them because of how the schedule turns. That gives the Mets about almost 3 full weeks here to really continue to play winning baseball and make that stretch very, very interesting. It's fascinating right now. I think my take is a lot of it is going to rest on the pitching, and I think that's tough to be sustainable because, listen, Kodai Senga quietly is now in the Cy Young hunt. I know he's not a front runner, but that's how good Senga's been. Quintana's been great. What are you going to get for Peterson the rest of the year? What are you going to get from McGill? Can you get anything from Carrasco? And the bullpen, ironically, has now been what we thought coming into the year, that these optioned arms up and down will be serviceable. Not great, not good, serviceable, that they get you by. They've been lately. Sam Coonrod, that kind of player of the world, right? Can that sustain for the next couple of weeks? Those are the questions I have while watching this team.
Yeah, there's obviously plenty of questions, and I think
but it's fun.
Mets have to hit. It is fun. I mean, it's better than the alternative, right? And the door to the wild card has been left cracked, like you said, Connor. So it's on the Mets to kick the door in. You talk about the core. Jeff McNeil looks like Jeff McNeil again. We'll get to the scoreboard. I always say scorecard, but I got scoreboard this time. So I got you, Jeff. I promise. But hitting 329 with an 840 OPS in the month of August. That's Jeff McNeil. Francisco Lindor over the last 28 days is hitting 357 with a 973 OPS. And he's right now top 5 in all of baseball in Fangraphs WAR after being number 7 last year. He's just a franchise player. And, he's a slow starter, always has been. His OPS being over 800 on the season now is the highest it's been since his star season in Cleveland in 2019. So this is the best Francisco Lindor that we've seen as a New York Met. And he has an outside shot for 30-30. He's 98th percentile and outs above average defensively. So he's been as good as basically possible defensively.
I think he wins the Gold Glove.
He should have won it last year.
Metric. So, yeah, you're right. It's stupid the way the award is given out these days. Honestly,
should have won it last year. Yeah. Maybe having better offense this year slightly will help him win a defensive award because that's how these things work. And Alonso, got to shout him out. We talked about the wrist injury that he had, and it seems like he's all the way back. Over the last 28 days, he has a 1.083 OPS with 13 home runs in the last 28 days. So he is on a trajectory he has a shot to hit 50. So obviously he feels all the way back. And like you said, the DJ Stewarts, the Jonathan Arauz, the Rafael Ortega, those guys are all pitching in as well. The one thing I want to focus on the pitching side is Carlos Carrasco. Like, I think David Peterson, you're going to get some good, you're going to get some bad. Tyler McGill, get some good, get some bad. It doesn't feel like they're going to get any good from Carlos Carrasco. And I mean that respectfully. And Joey Lucchesi had a good spot start. And I know some people will want to talk about Mike Vasil, and we'll get to him probably later. But do you consider flipping Carlos Carrasco out of the rotation and giving Joey Lucchesi more of a look as, give yourself a better shot? Like, the odds are not in the Mets' favor to be a playoff team. But while we're here and kind of have a shot, give yourself the best chance every 5th day.
I'm with you, Joe. I mean, once again, not to pile on Cookie, incredible human, incredibly resilient throughout his career, but this is a conversation about what's best for the Mets right now. And here's the thing with Carrasco for me. I mean, he's striking out 6.6 batters over 9. He's not striking out anybody, and he's typically throughout his career has hung around over 10. So that's a big drop off and stuff. You look at the last 5 games, and this dates all the way back to July 29th, but starting with the most recent, all the way to that 29th date. 4 innings, 9 hits, 3 earned runs. 3 innings, 4 hits, 2 earned runs, 3 walks, no length. 5 innings, once again, 2 earned runs, 2 walks. Okay, that's a serviceable start. The Mets lost that game to the Cubs, though. The Royals, 6 innings, 6 earned runs. It's not even close to competitive. And then 2.1 innings on July 29th for 6 earned runs, 8 total runs. Let's be honest. When he pitches beyond 4 innings, the Mets are out of the game with the way he's pitched. When he gives up 3 earned runs or less, he only pitches 3 to 4 innings. So that neither scenario is putting you in a position, forget winning, to be competitive in the game. And it's no surprise the Mets in that stretch, or in those games that Carrasco started, were 1-4. So the one game they won is against Pittsburgh. They won 7-2 when they just knocked the ball around the yard. So I think when it comes down to it, why would you not look at Lucchesi, or almost, I had somebody jokingly, but not so jokingly, say it to me today. They're like, do they not have anybody else in the organization that can pitch to a 5.5 ERA? And I kind of looked and I was like, it's scary when you put it like that, because that is actually the question right now for Carrasco. And I think you have to make a pivot to Lucchesi in that scenario if you really do want to make things interesting here.
Yeah, I think it's about time. And, I'm sure Mike Vasil could pitch to a 5.5 ERA, but I would certainly like to give a look to Lucchesi. And, Carlos Carrasco, like you said, fantastic human being, overcame a lot to get back to where he was. And, nothing bad to say about Carrasco. As a Met, he seemingly has been a good teammate. Like, I have nothing bad, just right now he's not performing. So maybe it's a shift to the bullpen and he could be, a long guy in September, and you give a guy Lucchesi an extended look. Or if Mike Vasil keeps going on the trajectory that he is, then, maybe that's something that you look at as a potential September call-up.
They are interesting right now. It's going to be curious to see what the combo for us is next week, kicking things off, if this maintains. And if DJ Stewart decides to basically hit a home run at least every other day, since one of us on this podcast said, I don't want meaningless home runs from the likes of guys like DJ Stewart. I will raise my hand in shame over that one. All right, let's keep it moving here. A really interesting piece came out on The Athletic to kick off this week from Will Salmon and Tim Britton, obviously 2 guys that do a good job covering this team, on the Mets' new pitching lab in Port St. Lucie. If you're a longtime listener of this podcast, you've heard Joe often talk about the things that would be invested and developed under Steve Cohen's ownership for player development. And those things take a lot of time, especially when you're so far behind a lot of other organizations. And now we have this new pitching lab. So check out the piece on The Athletic. We want to touch on it. There's a lot of great stuff about the Mets' efforts in pitching development, including, of course, what they've been doing since Steve Cohen took over the organization, what they'll need to do in years ahead, especially with all these young arms in the system. So please go read the full piece. But Joe, I just want the basics here, right? What does this lab mean? People hear pitching lab, and it almost sounds like they're building robots that are going to throw 104 miles an hour on the corner. They got wipeout sliders. They got it all. What does a pitching lab at its basic function really serve for an organization with this technology?
It gives you the ability to break down the biomechanics of pitching. It gives you the ability to get numbers on everything they do. It could be an opportunity to maximize someone's delivery, lowering the risk of injury. It could help a guy like Brandon Sproat get some more ride on his fastball that at times could be a little flat. You can help shape someone's slider a little differently. To me, it's just trying to catch up to what the rest of the league is doing, because the Mets are they've been trying hard. Steve Cohen's been investing over the last 2 years into analytics and player development. But the idea is you want to become a pitching factory of sorts where, ideally you want to be like the Dodgers and those teams and that are churning out guy after guy after guy. It seems like the list never ends. But the idea is you should be able to take a 4th round pick or 5th round pick or whatever, pick your round that you want, like a mid-round guy that's not a top 100 draft pick or whatever. And you should see certain characteristics in that pitcher. You take him into the pitching lab, you could add some velocity. You could add, like I said, shape on a slider. You can maybe scrap a changeup for a splitter like Calvin Ziegler did before he got injured. Like just things like that. You really can overhaul what a pitcher actually does, and ideally help these pitchers be healthier based on the biomechanic things, like way above my like intelligence level. But certainly it's a step in the right direction, and this is the Mets' future. So it's something they're very invested in, and it's still in its infancy. Really, it's still kind of bare bones down there in the pitching lab. Like it's open, it exists, but the impact that it can have spans the major leagues and the minor leagues. When the season ends, you could send David Peterson to the pitching lab for some work. You could send Tyler McGill to the pitching lab for some work. Then obviously you could use your prospects as well. So I think it's all encompassing a good thing. And certainly when everyone's there in spring training in Port St. Lucie, it's probably going to be a pretty popular place. But it's a good sign for an organization that was years and years and years behind some of the competitors. And much like we talked about the farm system, when the Mets made the trades at the deadline, it was overhauling the farm system in a way that would take 2 to 3 years. The Mets are putting the type of investment into this where they're trying to cut down their, just to use a round number, call it a 5-year gap between them and some other teams, and try to trim that down to 2 or something like that. So it's something that'll take time, but it's a step in the right direction. And if you wanted the Mets to become best in class, like this is just step one of many steps to come over the next couple of years. But it's a good sign that it's open and going. And like you said, fantastic piece by Will and Tim. They do excellent work over at The Athletic. So go give it a read. It's going to have a lot of big words and smart people talk, but it shows where the Mets are headed versus where they were.
Without a doubt. It's yet another example of using your financial advantage in every possible competitive way. And sure, the Mets, like everybody else, they get only a certain amount of picks in the draft. They only get a certain amount of international signing bonus money, right? Even with the luxury tax, there are still limits to what you can do in free agency, despite Steve Cohen trying to test that to its absolute limit. But what there are no limits on is tools and data of player development. And this is a perfect prime example of those tools of how to tap into every last ounce of talent that the guys are bringing into the organization to set them up for success. So I echo what you say. Go read the full piece. I think it's a really promising sign for the Mets organization. Speaking of that, let's go down on the farm here, Joe, where there's been plenty of promising signs across all minor league levels for the Mets organization. Let's rapid fire the week that was for these guys. We'll bundle them by the level they're at in the minor league, starting, of course, with AAA Syracuse, Ronny Mauricio, and Brett Baty. Joe, what have you seen, not only since Baty's gone back down, but for the guy that everybody wants called up in Ronny Mauricio?
I mean, Ronny really hasn't hit much of late. He hasn't, frankly, hit over the last month. If we're being honest, his OPS is around 700 over the last month. So I know that there was an article that he was kind of bored at AAA. I think kind of regardless of where he's at offensively and the stats over like the last month, I think the Mets would be doing a disservice to not give him a look. Today, September 1st, pick your date. But I think Ronny Mauricio needs to be up with the big league team and get a chance to get some at-bats. Allow him to see some failure now. I think you need to assess what he is for 2024. And if the Mets don't call him up at all this year, then I'm going to be honest with you. I think the idea would have to be they don't have a plan for Ronny Mauricio in 2024 because otherwise they call him up. He's on the 40-man roster. It's not like they have to DFA someone. And I think they can afford to maybe not have Danny Mendick and Jonathan Arauz in the lineup every single day. So that should give some opportunity for Mauricio. And I think it would be good to bring him up. And you go to Brett Baty. he's hitting AAA pitching kind of like we expect. Over the last week, he's hitting 313. Hasn't hit home runs like he did the first couple days, but he made a really nice defensive play the other day, going back, kind of like a basket catch over the shoulder. So, he looks like a guy that is getting his feet back under him. And I would have the expectation that Baty will be back up before long, probably early in September, maybe when rosters expand. But those are two guys that I think it's important for the Mets to have up for the month of September. You see all prospects getting called up across the sport. The Yankees are calling up Everson Pereira. The Cardinals called up Mason Wynn. The Angels called up their first-round pick from last month.
That was insane.
So prospects are getting looks. So I think it would be the prudent move for the Mets sometime in the next 10 days to have both Baty and Mauricio back up with the big team and give them the chance to play on a near everyday basis, purely as an evaluation tool for 2024.
At the AA level, of course, the Binghamton Rumble Ponies, two new additions, maybe the two headliners of the trade deadline. Of course, Drew Gilbert, former first-round pick of the Astros, brought back in the Verlander trade, center fielder Drew Gilbert, and of course, Luisangel Acuna. We'll call him an infielder right now, Joe. I think that's fair, and maybe the outfield is in his future, but the main return from the Max Scherzer trade, I'll say it like this, Joe. Every time I log on at night and see SNY Mets or your account, it's kind of in the mold of posting Drew Gilbert or Luisangel Acuna getting the offense started for the Rumble Ponies.
Drew Gilbert's simply been on fire. Over the last week, he's hitting 471 with a 1.289 OPS, and he has a home run mixed in there. And he's been the best performer of any of the players that they traded for since joining the Mets. He's hitting 346 as a Rumble Pony so far with a 940 OPS, playing the heck out of center field, showing his strong arm, good hustle on the base paths. Like, he's not a big stolen base threat, but you see him running just multi-game hit after multi-game hit. Drew Gilbert's been tremendous. Everything that probably the Mets were hoping they could get over his first couple of weeks in the organization. Luisangel Acuna, he had a bit of a slow start. He was really struggling. And if you look at hit in the transition to Binghamton, but if you look at his overall stat line with Binghamton, you're not going to be overly impressed. Over the last week, though, he's hitting 300, has a 390 OBP, has a couple steals mixed in there. He's still trying to catch his older brother
just for that around the bases.
For that $5,000 bet. But yeah, exactly, Connor. Like, he goes to steal. If the throw's not there, he's going to be going to third. So certainly showing that athlete that he is. And the Mets have played him a little bit at second base as well now. So he's starting to get that experience at both middle infield spots with the Mets organization. Still feel great, obviously, about Acuna, my number one prospect in the system. But yeah, just kind of been a slow start. But these guys have been with the Mets organization for less than 20 games. So don't want to go too crazy on just like those small sample statistics. But Acuna's athleticism is jumping off the page.
A little deeper in high A ball, Brooklyn, Ryan Clifford, big power bat, kind of corner infielder. He was the other player in the Justin Verlander trade from the Astros. There are people that believe he's an even more, I would say, higher ceiling prospect than Gilbert. And then Jett Williams, friend of the show, Jett Williams, who it's just insane what this kid is doing every time you turn on a Cyclones game right now.
Quiet week for Ryan Clifford offensively. Didn't really do much. I think he had a double. It didn't hit any home runs, hit one something, but quiet week offensively. But what stood out, and he looked okay out there. He finally is starting to get some feelers defensively in the corner outfield. He's played a little left. He's played a little right. So they're at least seeing what he can do out in the corner outfield spots.
Does he have a big arm, Joe? A big enough arm?
I don't know if he has a right field arm,
right.
But I'd say he probably has a left field arm, a good enough arm. I just wonder if the athleticism will play long term. But certainly at this level, let's give him the look at all the spots that you possibly can. Counterpoint to Ryan Clifford having a quiet week offensively, Jett Williams has not had a quiet week offensively. It's been a week since he joined us on the Mets pod, and we made the joke last week that the Mets pod push really helped out Kevin Parada. Maybe the Mets pod push is a thing. We helped out Jett Williams.
Elixir.
Yeah, he he hit 389 with a 1.365 OPS and homered in back-to-back games this week for Brooklyn. And of course, those back-to-back games were the day after I wrote an article for SNY.TV saying that home run power won't be a big part of his game. So I'm not saying Jett Williams read my piece for SNY, but if he did, he told me to shove it real quick. And he was named a top 50 prospect in baseball by Kylie McDaniel over at ESPN. So, the Mets pod is a Jett Williams show. And I think the rest of the country and the rest of the prospect world are finally starting to grasp the type of prospect that Jett Williams is, who I happily ranked number 2 in the system. And there are some people that think maybe he should even be number 1.
Yeah, the speed, the ability to get on base, now swinging a hot bat, which he's always swung a good bat, but now it just looks like he's hitting the ball even harder. I mean, we can't say it enough how excited we are for Jett Williams. And it's got to be fun, Joe, to cover a system that has legitimate, we're assuming, big league talent at every single level right now with massive, massive upside.
Yeah, it's exciting and it's going in the right direction. I know there's been a bunch of organizational rankings coming out, ranking them anywhere from 11 to 14 in baseball. I think that maybe it's just kind of a mix of graduating guys like Alvarez and Baty off the list and then adding to the list. But when I look at this team, this organization, significantly deeper than it was a few weeks ago, certainly deeper than it was a few months ago. So feel really good about every day watching and following the minor league games at every level, knowing that there's something. There's not a level that I'm like, I don't really have to pay attention to what's going on there. There's something at every single level, and I think it's going to keep going in that direction.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. Let's get into the scoreboard and review our results quickly from last week and make some new predictions for the exciting week ahead. The first one, over-under push, was set at 6 for Jett Williams walks in the next 6 Brooklyn Cyclones games. Joe, you went under. I went with the push. He only had 3. Point goes to you, Joe. Nice call for Jett Williams saying, forget the walks, time to hit home runs. Over-under push was set at 2 for Brett Baty home runs in the next 6 Syracuse games. They only played 5, not 6, so 1 less game. Joe, you went with the push. I went with the over. Neither of us get a point. Brett Baty only hit 1 home run in those 5 games. Over-under push set at 1 for Ryan Clifford home runs in the next 6 Cyclones games. Joe, you pushed. I went with the over. He didn't hit any. No points awarded. Tough start for the boys right now. All right. Joe, you still have 1 point here. I have none yet. Over-under push at 1 for Lindor stolen bases in the Mets' next 7 games. We both went over. He only had 1. No points awarded. Lindor instead decided to make his trot a little slower around the bases, hitting a lot of home runs and hitting the ball hard this week. Over-under push at 7. Jeff McNeil hits in the next 7 games. Joe, you went with the push. I went over. McNeil got 11 hits. 11 hits. So the point goes to me. In classic Connor and Joe fashion, we each walk away with a point from the week. We are tied at 16 on the season. It's just unbelievable. Even when we make some, off the rails picks, we don't separate from each other. This week, let's start with this, Joe. The floor is yours for the first one. Over-under push at 1. DJ Stewart home runs in the next 6 Mets games.
I find it very hard to bet against the home run superstar that is DJ Stewart, but I'm going to say that this week he comes down to earth a little bit on the home runs.
How dare you?
I will go under. I will say DJ Stewart will not hit a home run by the next time we record, which I'm going to guess you're probably not going to agree with me.
I'm going to push. I'm going to go with 1. I think he's still got 1 more in him. It just makes me laugh, man. DJ Stewart in 73 plate appearances has 6 home runs right now. Daniel Vogelbach in 273 plate appearances has 10 home runs. So we are officially on watch if DJ Stewart can catch up to Daniel Vogelbach here. I'll go, but once again, I will go with the push. I think he gets 1 in the next 6 games. Over-under push is set at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs in the next 6 Mets games. Man, it's dangerous to bet against Pete right now, huh? I'm going to go over, Joe. I am. I really wanted to push on this one, but we say this about Pete all the time. It's kind of like Alvarez. When he hits one, he hits them in bunches. I'm going to go over and think Pete can get three to four in these next 6 games.
I'm glad you went away from the push because that's what I'm going to go with. But Pete Alonso could go anyway. There's no question about it. If we could hop on to record next week's show and we'd be like, Pete Alonso's over under 2 home runs. He hit 5. But I will go 2, and we'll see how it works out.
Over under push is at 1 for Francisco Lindor stolen bases in the next 6 Mets games, Joe.
Over. I'm going to try again. Dust yourself off and try again. He's still trying to get to, I still think he has eyes on that 30-30, even if it's maybe a little improbable at this point. So I think he's going to get running. He just needs to stop hitting home runs. Just hit some singles and run, man. So over 1.
All right, I'll go for a push for Lindor. I think he's got at least 1 in him. I'll sit at the 1. It's, once again, like you said, he's just hitting the ball so hard that there aren't as many opportunities as there were. Over under push is at 6 for Jeff McNeil hits in the next 6 Mets games. I'm going to go over here, Joe. McNeil stays hot. He looks to be in form. Jeff McNeil trying to make a crazy surge to push his batting average. I'm not going to say to 300, but he's definitely tired of hitting in the 250s, it looks like.
Yeah, what's his season average at right now? You probably have Baseball Reference up.
I think do. It's like 260. McNeil is batting 266.
Okay. I mean, not ideal, but like you said, he is certainly turning it on. So I'm going to join you on the over. I think our odds maker, Jeff, is underselling Jeff McNeil a little this week.
All right, the next one. Over under pushes at 2 for Luisangel Acuna stolen bases in the next 6 Binghamton games. What do you like there, Joe?
Over.
Same.
He's got room to make up on his brother. I don't think he wants to be giving his brother some money. So Luisangel Acuna, if he gets on base, he's running.
The problem is he only needs an infield hit to get the number at 2.
Yeah.
So I'm going over as well. That one we are agreeing on. Over under push is at 4 for Jett Williams walks in the next 6 Cyclones games. I will go under here, Joe. I think Jett's seeing the ball well right now and not seeing the ball well where he's just not swinging. He's seeing the ball well where he is starting to drive the ball.
I will go push. I think pitcher's going to be a little more afraid of Jett Williams this week and pitch him a little more carefully. I don't think he's going to get back to the walk per game rate, but 4 out of the next 6 seems right.
Our last one, over under push at 1 for Ryan Clifford home runs in the next 6 Brooklyn Cyclones games.
I will push this one. It was obviously not a great last week offensively for Ryan Clifford, and I'll just kind of say he'll turn it back on this week, and he'll hit a home run this week.
I'll make it fun. I'll go with the over. I think Clifford can get 2 home runs in him. He's coming off a real cold stretch, as you said. It's time to get hot and comfortable for Ryan Clifford. All right, let's close out the show answering the mailbag questions as we always do. We got a lot of good questions this week. Hopefully, for those of you that don't hear your name on the show, we did a good job covering it already at the top of the episode. So, okay, let's start with this one from Josh Rogers. Of these recent Met call-ups, which have a good chance to play an important role in 2024? DJ Stewart, Jonathan Arauz, Danny Mendick, or Tim LeCastro? It's got to be Stewart, right?
I hope none of them. I mean
ideal.
That with so much respect.
Important role is that's a problem.
Yeah, but potentially playing a role. I think they had visions for Tim LeCastro in a meaningful way. He obviously had quite a few injuries and missed most of the year. But maybe DJ Stewart is that next find. Like, it happens. There are guys that are former good prospects that don't pan out and just one time get the right opportunity with the right situation and it works out. Like, it wouldn't shock me if DJ Stewart worked himself into a bench role next year. Like, I'm not saying he's going to be the Mets designated hitter or something, but so important is kind of the word there. But I think it's hard to bet against DJ Stewart. But the secondary guy, I think, would be Tim LeCastro. Like, if they want to bring him back to be that fifth outfielder, pinch runner extraordinaire kind of thing, like they wanted him to be when he made the opening day roster, I think it's got to be one of those two.
I'll say this about Stewart, and you know it, Joe. He was a first-round pick once upon a time. Okay, so talent and power is there, and if it just takes a little longer for some guys to find it, even on a bench role, like legitimately, we're not asking DJ Stewart to be batting cleanup next year for your 2024 New York Mets. A competition for a bench role, we'll see. It'll be interesting. I'm rooting for the guy, especially after he said diapers are expensive. All-time quote. All right, Brad Badini. What position do you envision Luisangel Acuna playing in the future for the New York Mets? Third base? I'd project one of Nimmo or Gilbert to play center, so that likely leaves second or third for Acuna, but they also have Jeff McNeil under contract for the next 3 seasons, but Jeff is versatile.
This stuff always works itself out. You can pencil this guy here, this guy there, pencil him wherever you want. But just talking pure, like not talking about the Mets' future specifically, but just talking Luisangel Acuna, most scouts think he's going to be best at second base long term. He's played some center field, and I do think you will see the Mets, if not this year, early next year, you'll see them start to dabble with him in the outfield. And if he can play center, you can play center. You can play left. You can play right. You can play the corners if you can play center. That's usually how it works. But most scouts that I've spoken to since the Mets have gotten Acuna think he's better in the infield dirt, more comfortable naturally because that's where he's always played. And that second base is probably his best position going forward.
This one from Mark. Jeremy Rodriguez, 2027 MLB MVP. I kid, but can you dive into his hot start with the Mets organization? I read that the Diamondbacks were crying that he was traded. Have scouts seen more potential from him this year than when he was ranked 45-ish in the international prospect rankings? Thanks, guys. Let's go Mets. For a little background, for those that aren't familiar with the name, Jeremy Rodriguez was the return for Tommy Pham. He's 17 when they acquired him. He did get a nice international signing bonus from the Diamondbacks. This isn't a no-name prospect. And Joe, while it's as low in terms of level of competition, this kid is raking as soon as he put on some variant of a Mets uniform.
Yeah, we can't go crazy about Dominican Summer League stats. I think I saw
still fun.
Yeah, I think I saw on Twitter this morning that there's 88 players in the Dominican Summer League that have an OBP over 400. Like that's how those leagues work. But Jeremy, I mean, what else can you say? I think as of this recording, he's hitting like 422 with almost 3 times the amount of walks as strikeouts. I would love to like find out who was crying and were they actually crying? Like, did they have like their international scouting director or something in the room be like, should we trade Rodriguez? And he just was like, no, just try. Like, don't let my guy go. But he was the Diamondbacks top international signing this past January, signed for, I think it was 1.25 million.
It was, yep.
Certainly over $1 million. And, you know, the early returns he's been fantastic, but this is something where it's maybe much akin to Marco Vargas, where Marco Vargas hit really well in the Dominican Summer League. People kind of didn't pay too much mind to, as they don't normally with DSL stats. He comes over stateside next year, gets a chance to play in the Florida Complex League. And if he starts doing the same thing there, then all of a sudden we'll be talking, you know, next year, midsummer, be like helium prospect, just like we talked about Marco Vargas, and be talking about the same for Jeremy Rodriguez. So for 2 months of Tommy Pham, whether Jeremy Rodriguez amounts to anything or flames out at the AA level or wherever the case may be, it was an expensive lottery ticket that they took a shot on. And I don't know how much more you could ask for in a trade for someone like that.
I think the takeaway with these situations is you'd always rather the kid forcing the conversation, that he's been so good that we're having the Jeremy Rodriguez conversation. And all you can ask is that they force that conversation through every level of the minor league organization. Jett Williams has done it. Obviously, a lot of guys they've brought into the organization have done that. It's something we went through with Mauricio and Baty, and hopefully the same for Jeremy Rodriguez, especially when you consider that it was for a rental. Last question for today's episode of the Mets Pod. This is from Jim, and it's something, Joe, you lightly, kind of teased in the beginning. Jim said, is there any chance Vasil gets a call up in September? He has been pitching very well. I believe Vasil is now on a little bit of a hot stretch here. So his last 3 starts, he's pitched 19 and 2/3 innings. This is from our friend Evan Stockton, who obviously does a great job calling the games for the Syracuse Mets. 19 and 2/3 innings, 11 hits during that stretch, only 4 earned runs, 6 walks, 15 strikeouts. After Vasil got off to a really tough start in AAA, as a lot of guys do when they make the jump with the offensive powerhouses that are in AAA, it seems like he's settling in, Joe. Is there any shot we see him this year? It seems maybe a little crazy, but when you consider what Carlos Carrasco is right now, maybe it's not.
I don't think it's impossible. I wonder if the Mets will be careful with the 40-man roster spot that would be required, because you would be starting Mike Vasil's service time early because he's not Rule 5 eligible this offseason, so you don't have to add him now. But if you do, if you add Mike Vasil now, it better not be for whatever. We want to take a look at him for a couple starts in September. The idea better be we're adding him to get a look in September because we think he has a chance to be the number 5 starter opening day 2024. Like, that's got to be the vision if Mike Vasil's coming up. I know a lot of people are just like, call up the kids, give them a shot. 40-man roster spots are very valuable. You only have 40 of them, naturally. And certainly throughout a year, you're always calling up guys, sending guys down, DFAing guys, and you don't want to kind of box yourself into a corner. So I think Vasil's pitching much better. I do think he needs to do a better job of holding his velocity into games. There has been over this stretch, even though he is pitching well, you've seen the velocity tick down a little bit when he got to the 6th inning or so. So just something to keep an eye on with him. But Vasil's a pitcher I feel great about, whether he is coming up in the next month or if it's something we see sometime next year when an injury arises. Like, he's in AAA now pitching fine. So he is on the short list of starting pitching depth for its organization. I have him number 2 in the organization behind Blade Tidwell. So I feel good about his potential. I think he's every bit of like a number 4 type of starter, which you need to develop your own number 4 starters instead of paying $15 million a year for, I like what Jose Quintana's done as a Met, but you don't want to have to constantly pay someone like that. And if you could develop your own, I think that brings an incredible amount of value. And Mike Vasil kind of looks the part of it. And it wouldn't shock me if you saw him in the next month, but I would caution the Mets. If you guys are listening, just make sure if you're going to call up Mike Vasil, the idea is because you see him competing for a job opening day 2024, not just to take a look at him.
Joe, I don't often correct you, but sometimes it's necessary. Jose Quintana is the number 2 starter on my New York Mets right now. So that is a guy that you do pay. So,
that's fair.
How things quickly change. Good for Quintana coming back and pitching lights out, and hopefully he keeps it up, because him being a back end number 4 or number 5 at this level for 2024 really changes the optics and the view of the Mets. So, Joe, I don't get to do this too often because we are very busy on this show lately. We cover a lot in the minor leagues. The Major League Club has decided to become very interesting very quickly. We play our scoreboard game that neither of us have been able to break away from the pack. We're both tied at 16-16. But closing thoughts on today's episode of the Mets Pod.
Sweep the Braves. Why not? Let's go. Just go ahead. Just go ahead. Go ahead and take care of Atlanta. The Angels come into town. We know how they're playing baseball. Like, man, they went all in, and oosh, like that has not quite worked out for them. So they're coming into town at this coming weekend, and take 2 out of 3 from them, and let's roll. I wanted the top 6 pick, but winning 3 out of 4 against the Cardinals, winning the first one against Atlanta, though a lot of you are going to listen to this on Wednesday, and the Mets may have gotten crushed by Atlanta on Tuesday. And if that's the case, then rescind that statement. But I would say, go ahead, play some good baseball. It is fun to watch the Mets win. As fun as it would be for my draft coverage for this show next July, if the Mets had the number 4 pick or number 3 pick, if they can somehow sneak into the wild card, it might be the most hilarious baseball story in history. The biggest payroll in history of pro sports goes ahead and falls on its face. So they sell their star players and they play. And DJ Stewart and Jonathan Arauz and Danny Mendick are folk heroes for all time coming to Mets old timer day games. So go ahead, win some games. Let's go for it.
I'm with you. It would be by far the most entertaining time we've ever covered this team. And we have covered a 100-win season. We have covered a change in ownership. We have covered emergency pods of massive free agent signings and trades. this version of the New York Mets making a miracle run, and I wouldn't care if they lost 20-0 in the playoff games that they'd have to play. Just actually being able to pull this off after everything that's happened this season would be unbelievable. And of course, we will be here with you the entire way. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And remember to subscribe to our show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.